Welcome to the 67th episode of Dialogika, a podcast between two friends about the latest in politics, society, and feminism in Indonesia and the world. I'm Stephanie Tangkilisan.
And I'm Sweedian Lee. And this week, in our very last episode before the presidential elections, we're going to cover the latest debates, the fourth round of debates between Jokowi and Prabowo, and talk about what they discussed, but also preparing y'all and us to vote.
Yeah, we're just going to have also a quick recap on our feelings about the series of debate overall and these candidates overall. And we just want to take a step back and forward at the same time to think about who will become a president for the next 5 years.
I mean, I definitely did not expect us, when we started this podcast in 2016, that we will still be talking about the 2019 presidential elections. But we have some feelings and we will share them with you now.
Mm-hmm.
So, here's to it.
So this is the last debate just between Jokowi and Prabowo, but there was going to be one more debate for all you indecisive people out there, myself included. That will be between Jokowi, Prabowo, and their respective vice presidential candidates.
Mm-hmm. That last debate between the two tickets will be on the Saturday right before Election Day, so on the 13th. I don't know why they have a debate so close to Election Day. I feel like at some point you should just
call it.
Stop. Especially since the fifth debate will be on a topic of like the economy and finance and investment. It's like that's such a niche topic to launch on the public right before.
It's not a niche topic. Economy affects everybody.
I guess, yeah. I feel like if they were gonna, you're right, it's not a niche topic, but they could have talked about it earlier.
It's like probably one of the most important topics that affects everyone's daily life.
Anyway, on this fourth round of debates, as Stephanie said, it's the last one between just Jokowi and Prabowo, and suffice to say, these two have gone up against each other so many times now, even from the 2014 cycle, and this one didn't disappoint, did it?
I think there was a moment in the debate where like Prabowo was just like didn't know how to respond to Jokowi in a non-emotional way, and he's just like, I mean, I don't know how to respond to my friend here.
Pa Jokowi yang saya hormati, I respect you so much.
No, it's like he said the word sahabat, teman saya, which is like a friend in a non-sarcastic way. Like I feel like he was genuinely trying to convey that he's like buddies with Jokowi by now.
Mm-hmm.
Which was, I think, such an Indonesian way. Like, you don't imagine Trump and Hillary being like, we're friends outside of this. No. Even though like, Prabowo and Jokowi do not like each other, are not really friends. Like, you don't see them being in the same WhatsApp group, like, sending memes to each other.
I don't know. Do you think it's a very, like, Jawa thing also, Javanese?
It is.
It's about, like, being polite in front of your
enemy.
In front of your enemy. Like, you're never gonna be outright, like, hostile. That you do in the back.
Yeah. I think this was, for me, the debate where Prabowo seemed less emotional.
Really?
Like,
if this is less emotional.
I think he just didn't get, like, angry or... Like, the first debate, I think he was very easily riled up.
Yeah.
But this, he seemed like more... He had emotions, but I think he kept them in check.
Well, it's his brand, right? So what can you say? His brand is emotion. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of it, just a bit of context for our listeners. This fourth round of debate, which happened just this past Saturday at the end of March, is between Jokowi and Prabowo, and the topics are on ideology, or Pancasila in this sense, foreign affairs, foreign relations, defense, and governance, or how the government works. And I think, there's a lot of things and issues that could be covered in these four topics, right? And It was interesting to hear how Jokowi and Prabowo came about with their arguments, because I think they come from two very different, I want to say, belief systems about Indonesia's role in terms of like as a sovereign nation, as a nation that has a huge role regionally, but also globally as the largest Muslim nation in the world. And it was interesting to hear like their opposing views on these difficult and obviously sensitive and controversial issues. So that's like a little bit of background. Obviously, I think it was interesting that the debate started with the section on Pancasila, or the Indonesian ideology.
Yeah.
And I think that's a way to very much like set it up for both candidates to like, nobody's gonna say no to Pancasila. This is sort of like reaffirming your patriotism. But what kind of patriotism, right?
Yeah.
One of the debate questions about Pancasila, or about the Indonesian sort of like core ideology, is how do we educate the youth, the public, about these core beliefs of our sovereign nation without making it feel like indoctrination. And, Prabowo answered with saying like, oh, this kind of education should be incorporated from the beginning through the curriculums all the way through like university education. While for Jokowi, it's a much more sort of like, he's less inclined of being prescriptive about like, oh, you need to remember these 5 things, which Stephanie, you and I can probably remember, right? Like we grew up having to memorize the 5 tenets of the Pancasila. I mean, I forgot all of them. The fourth one is the hardest.
Lord.
But I think Jokowi was much more sort of like, these are core tenets. Yes, we need to remember them. We need to memorize them. We need to learn them. But at the core of it, it's about tolerance. It's about how do you love each other as a nation and acknowledge everyone's diversity, as opposed to Prabowo's approach, which I think is a much more old school approach to Pancasila, where like, this is our ideology. This needs to be the thing that governs our diversity. As opposed to, for Jokowi, it's like, our diversity is what we should celebrate instead of try to, package or control using ideology. And I think that sets a tone throughout the whole debate.
I mean, from there on, I feel like they showed a really different way to like go about how this can be interpreted, right? Like,
yes,
Prabowo's vision of Indonesia is one where we need to spend more on our military and make sure that we own all of our ports and all of this different, like, more nationalistic, not necessarily fascist, but like more right-wing ideology.
Capital
right?
N nationalistic, right? Like, this is our nation. We are,
we
are a sovereign
We
nation.
are one. We are a sovereign nation. We need to be...
We need to be respected, right? That's
strong.
one of the things he talked about.
Yeah.
Indonesia is not respected.
Yeah. And I feel like that's kind of true. Like, I feel like Indonesia is always the largest unknown country in the world.
Oh, yeah.
It's like whenever you travel or are abroad, people are like, oh, Indonesia. And then you're like, oh, yeah, it's like the 4th largest country by population. Everyone's like, what? I never heard of it.
It's like the largest Muslim country in the world. It's like, what? I thought it was just Bali. Like,
I mean, it's like, and I do think like Indonesia's not respected as a country, and because I think for the most part we haven't really caused any trouble on the international stage. Since except our escapades in the 60s, we haven't tried to invade anyone, nor has anyone tried to invade us. So it's like, I can see both sides, right? On the one hand, the nationalistic side of me is like, yeah, we should build our military and be respected. And then the other side, I'm like, what for? We're not really gonna fight any wars. Like, I'd rather spend that money on infrastructure and education. Because these kind of things, our financial resources are limited, right? Like, the majority of Indonesians are not taxed because they don't earn enough to be taxed. Like,
and we could spend a whole episode on the Indonesian tax system.
Oh, Lord.
Probably a few episodes.
And then there's that, like, on the nationalist side as well. It's like, in a way, like, Jokowi's response was like, we have diplomacy and all of this different stuff, but I kind of somewhat believe in the realist model of international relations, which is, it doesn't really matter how good your diplomacy is. Sometimes it's like, what do you have to back it up by, like, economic resources or military might and so forth. So I also see that point of view. Like, I think, but ultimately it's like, what do you think will benefit us the most long term, right?
Interesting, because I think I take this is one of the few instances, listeners, where Stephanie and I might diverge in our opinion. so relish it. I did not prescribe to the more realist view of the situation. I think diplomacy has a place. I think soft power has a place. And I think, there was a significant shift, in my opinion, of what Indonesia's role in regionally and globally is after the 60s. I think, during the time of Sukarno and during the time of Suharto, there was such a charismatic leader that was basically, whatever the leader wanted to do in the regional and global space, the nation will follow. And now, because we don't necessarily have a person like that anymore, I think Indonesia's role in the space is much more as a mediator and much more as the middleman between countries. And I think it has an important role in that, given its status as the largest country in ASEAN, given the status as the largest Muslim nation in the world. I think there's so much potential in that aspect that I, perhaps naively maybe, in terms of international relations, I would so much rather invest on how can we be good diplomats rather than, beef up our military arsenal, as Prabowo would say, like, how many tanks do we have that are ours and they are not like foreign made or whatever. So I don't know.
I mean, we're such a long way away from actually being able to build our world-class tanks.
But that's actually one of the things that Jokowi wanted to highlight to Prabowo, right? Like, you might want to be able to make all these things that beef up your military arsenal, but the reality is we have a limited budget. We need to work with other countries and find these opportunities from almost like a purely financial business perspective, where you got to make things work with what you got. But again, for our listeners, right, we're seeing somebody, Jokowi, who comes from a business background talking about this, and then Prabowo, who comes from a military background talking about this. Obviously, they're coming from very different approaches to solving the issue of Indonesia's defense and, its role in the global space and the regional space. So I get what you're coming from. Obviously, we want to be a functioning nation with like a strong military.
I don't know. I feel like there's a reasonable. For example, I think it's really wise for us to invest in maritime security. I wouldn't spend our money on tanks, which we're not going to have a defensive war where we're going to need tanks.
We are an island nation.
Are we going to have, we don't even have a, warship to, I don't think we're going to try invade any country anymore either. So, there's a way where I feel like we have so many problems with our land mass in terms of illegal fishing and immigrants dying trying to go to Australia and somehow ending up in Indonesia. We have a lot of maritime issues, and that's certainly something I think it would be wise for us to spend our resources on, not just for security in a security for Indonesia's safety or whatever, but there are potential maritime conflicts. That's where things for us are more plausibly the whole the chain of islands.
The South China Sea.
That's seriously a concern. That's somewhere we cannot exert any kind of influence because there's no way we can go against the Chinese Navy, right? And the Philippines has U.S. backing, and if we don't have any military might, then we might lose that area, and that's fine, but that's certainly something to think about. I'm not thinking that we need to defend that necessarily, our claim, but it is true that we don't have the means to enforce our foreign policy through diplomacy alone when we don't think about how we're going to back that up. It's sort of it's all bark and no bite.
Well, this is part of a difficult question, right? What approach do we want to take? Because I think there's a difference, right, between beefing up our defense systems, which I think is what Prabowo is more concerned about, making sure that all our airports and our ports are owned by Indonesia, that our defenses have the strongest weapons or whatever. And then, as you said, something you're describing, which is more on, can we have our own strength and power to enforce maybe diplomacy efforts?
Yeah, we have none.
True, we don't have much there either. So it's a delicate balance. But I don't think the way that Prabowo was describing about let's make our budget bigger, let's pour more money into it, I don't think that's the only solution.
No, definitely isn't. And I think he, as someone who served in the army and the special forces, he definitely has a certain conception of what is a strong military, which may be different than the way I'm describing it, right? Because I'm thinking about it in today's Indonesia in terms of what I think is a defensible argument for more military spending. And that's probably different than what he's thinking in terms of military spending.
That's true. And I think this was a common trend when I was researching this topic and sort of like reading on what a lot of experts and people responded. It's like Prabowo's view on what Indonesia as a nation should have, it seems very outdated and old school.
Old school, yeah. Yeah, for
and
sure.
And Jokowi can talk about like, oh, actually, when we talk about investing in our military and our defenses, like, let's talk about cyber technology instead of just like land tanks when we're a island nation.
Where are we gonna send those tanks? It makes no sense. I think that's where you can really see the difference between Jokowi and Prabowo in this instance. Like, not only this, but how they see the world and how they see Indonesia as a country, and technology in particular going forward. Like, I felt like Jokowi is a very current president in the sense of like, okay, not just in terms of military, but in terms of finance. Like, the reason why we have foreign partners and ports and airports and all of this different, because they're really, really expensive things to build. And our country does not have the means to build them. And I think Jokowi's view, and I think I agree with him, is that rather than not having any of these, let's have foreign partners to help us finance this, and then we'll still manage and control some of it, but we'll have it built because the people need those kind of infrastructure now. Like, and I think that's a really valid point on his part.
All across the debate, you could sense that Prabowo was coming from a place of like, I fear the outsider. I fear anybody coming in and participating.
It's not that I fear it. I think he's trying to rouse that sense of fear and that he's the one that can, be the protector. And I think he's trying to show that, look, Jokowi seems very scrappy and doesn't have the track record or ability to become that tough negotiator that Indonesia needs to be respected in the world again. That's what his spiel is.
The tough guy spiel.
Jokowi is like, we just need to play this smart and, figure out how to practically make things happen. And I think Jokowi has him on that. I think Jokowi clearly defeats Prabowo in this sense of like, this is, I think, one of Jokowi's strongest performances that I've seen.
Yeah.
And I think one of the most convincing one, in my opinion, at least even in terms of me supporting him. I think he shows even more depth than I think how Jokowi used to debate. And 5 years ago when he wasn't president, I felt like Jokowi has grown a lot, and he's really shown what 4 years of being president can do for a man in terms of growth.
Yeah, and definitely, it almost feels like at a certain point, obviously everybody has their talking points and both candidates have their teams to prepare them, but Jokowi almost felt like he owned all of that messaging and all of that language, and it doesn't seem like he's pulling it out of thin air.
No, he seems very grounded.
It just comes naturally. And obviously, if anybody has watched the debates from 5 years ago, you could see how green he was back then.
Yeah.
And now he can like really stand on his own 2 feet, and even when Prabowo asked him like hard emotional questions, he can respond with like, but I have a plan. And that, I feel like, is the strongest response to a lot of Prabowo's more nationalistic, jingoistic rhetoric.
Yeah.
Like, I have a plan moving forwards, and I have a good track record, or at least I have a better track record than you have right now.
What are some of your other thoughts, like, overall about this election? Like, I think in a way for me, it has been a lot less turbulent than I thought it'd be.
It's a lot more mature than I thought
Chill.
it would be.
Yeah. Yeah, and in a really good way. Like, I thought it would be a lot more, like, dirty campaigning and, like, a lot more scandals and, like, rallies and all of those stuff. And it's been fairly reasonable and muted.
Relatively.
At least for me. It's definitely less hot than the Jakarta gubernatorial campaign, for sure.
I was going to say, I felt like that was much more contentious and in many ways dangerous.
Yeah.
This felt much more civil, and maybe that's just, the good old like Javanese social norms kicking into gear here.
We shall see.
I think, optimistically, I'm hoping that, and I may be naive here, I'm hoping that part of the reason why it's so civil or it's so mature from both camps is that they recognize the clearly growing sense of extremism in certain parts of Indonesia. And radical intolerance in certain parts of Indonesia, and they don't want to feed into that, and they don't want that to play a huge role, as it probably did in the Jakarta gubernatorial race, right? Like, they don't want that to feed as huge of a role in the presidential elections because they know what's at stake. It's a slippery slope once you introduce those kind of influences into the race. So that's my optimistic view on it. Who knows? They might still be conversing. They probably are still conversing with those people's behind the scenes, but it seems like at least in the public space, in the discussions we have out there, it's much more civil, much more mature, and I'm hoping, I was talking
that'll carry over.
Yeah, and I was talking to Afu about this, right? Like, for people like us, our generation, right? The 2014 cycle was sort of like the first presidential cycle in which we were like, we can't vote. That's one.
Mm-hmm.
But also that we're like more cognizant about. This feels like we're now more mature in our political thinking. We now can recognize more about the kind of issues that the nation is encountering, and so we can respond better. And I'm hoping that the youth in Indonesia and the Indonesian youth abroad can like be galvanized to do something, because otherwise we're just going to keep repeating the same mistakes, the same administrations of years gone by. And I don't know, I'm optimistic that this election, as well as the legislative election that's going to be coinciding with it, will push the country forwards rather than backwards.
I honestly can't make a prediction who will win. Like, the consensus is, I think Jokowi might eke out this victory, but there is a, like, clear, it's going to be a closer election than it was before in 2014.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, the problematic thing is that there's not enough polling that is large enough in scale and independent and reliable enough to be able to guess. So I think it's just important for you guys to vote and voice your opinion.
Yeah.
And even, like, I think me and Sweden are both going to vote internationally, since we're both not in Indonesia right now.
Mm-hmm.
We have both successfully registered. Yay us.
That's a win.
Look at us adulting.
If you haven't registered, you screwed up.
I think you're too late.
I think you're too late.
But yeah, contact your nearest consulate or embassy. And they have a nice WhatsApp line where you can ask questions, because the Indonesian embassy and consulates are on their game. And I applaud them for, like, having an open WhatsApp line, and everything is online for you to register. It was really easy to register, actually.
Yeah, same here.
And, like, for New Yorkers, the election in the consulate will be on April 13th from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. 6 p.m. I think.
Check your local.
Bring your passport. I will be there at some point.
Say hi to Stephanie if you're voting in New York.
Hi.
But yes, we've talked about the presidential elections in Indonesia for a long time now, for a couple of months. We have obviously the 4 episodes on the debate so far. We have additional episodes on the candidates themselves. So if you want to take a look and listen back to those, you certainly can. And please make sure that you're informed. Please make sure that you go out and vote. And, this is an important, very important election. I wish I was in Indonesia to do it in person, but it is our civic duty, regardless of where you are in the world, to vote, to exercise your right to have a voice.
Yeah.
I remember when we first talked about the candidates, Jokowi, Maruf, Prabowo, Sandi.
Yeah.
We were concerned about Well, yes, but we're also concerned about the possibilities of, golput, or like, people not voting, or people doing those like mistaken votes so that your ballot doesn't count.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think, I will say this, after hearing this debate and after like going through this whole course of like campaigning and conversations around this, I don't think that's the way forwards. I think there's real hope for something here. I think change can happen. I think to be so nihilistic to go and do a blank vote is the wrong step forwards, in my opinion. But that's my opinion. But I just want to say it out loud because I want to hold myself accountable, and in case anybody wants to know my opinion.
I think we're probably some of the easiest people to know who our opinions are. What our opinions are.
We've been doing this for, almost 3 years now, so if you don't know our opinions, well...
That's not our fault.
You must be new here.
Yeah.
Anyways, go out and vote. If you're in Indonesia, it's April 17th. If you're abroad, it's likely the weekend before.
Yeah, I just feel like if you don't vote, you have no right to complain about the outcome.
Oh, yes. That is true. Very true.
It's one of my favorite problematic fave ones that decisions are made by those who show up. That's from Jeff Bartlett from The West Wing. And I used to love the show so much. And then I started trying to rewatch it. And then there's like so many problematic things that I didn't realize was problematic today. It doesn't age well, that series, but it's
there are some gems in there.
Yeah, for sure. All right, but everyone, you do your thing. We try to be as unbiased as possible to both of these candidates, and try to really just like put everything aside and talk based on the substance of what they're talking about. And there's always way more reading out there if you want to like read more, and we'll put more links and expert analysis. The different opinions of expert and a description link in our website.
I'm going to put that into those.
Shut up! I have a fever. I'm like, also listener note, I am currently sick and have fever, and my head feels very heavy, and still doing this podcast for you guys. So
at least you can speak now.
This is true.
Okay.
Vote, please. Otherwise, don't complain about it because you did not participate in the democratic process. So, vote. But anyway, we also got some of your feedback from our mental health episode, and we got some really touching ones, and we just want to let you guys know that we hear you, and we're here for people, and thank you for enjoying that episode and saying that it was useful. Sometimes we don't know if our opinions are useful to anyone at all, so that was we're glad that happened, and we made that happen.
And we always appreciate people reaching out. So if you have any stories, questions, or just like responses, feel free to reach out to us. You can email us, you can DM us on Facebook. We'll try to get back to you as soon as we can. But we definitely love hearing from you, and we appreciate you and your stories.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. You can find more information and resources of whatever we talked about on our website, dialogika.id.
Music credits to John Dealey, Lee Roosevelt, and of course, Broke for Free.
If you like what you hear and want to support us, please review our podcast on the Apple Podcast app or whatever app you use to listen to your podcast. And please share our podcast with your friends. It's the best way to spread the word about Dialogika.
If you want to get more involved, we'd love to hear from you. Our email is dialogikapodcast@gmail.com, or just shoot us a message on our Facebook page.
You can also find us on Instagram, YouTube, SoundCloud, and now Twitter. Please follow us in these various platforms. Our Twitter handle is @DialogikaPod. Also, follow me on Twitter. It's StephTank. That's STEPHTANGK.
Thank you again, and see you guys next time.
Bye!